This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. Joining me this week for a very special minisode, the one and only Nick White.
Hey.
Thanks for joining me, Nick. Today we're talking about Ice Cream Man Volume 6. We are continuing down this delicious hellhole into the hellscape of the minds of W. Maxwell Prince, Martin Morazzo on art, colors by Chris O'Halloran, letters by good old Neon. This volume covers issues 21 through 24 for those of you who are reading single issues at home. And I'm just going to say, before we get too deep into the discussion, full spoilers for the volume. So if you haven't read Volume 6, get on it. Go back, reread the whole series if you gotta. None of it's connected, but you know what? Maybe a little bit of it is. So let's just dive into this. Nick, this is the 6th volume. This is the 7th episode of Ice Cream Man discussion that we've done. What are your thoughts on this? How are you feeling 6 volumes into Ice Cream Man?
I mean, technically 7 volumes, right? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Ice Cream, the quarantine comics. Yeah.
Oh, man. Weirdly, I think I feel better about this series after volume 6 than I did after volume 5.
Yeah.
And I would love to see, and at one point I sort of dug into this, but didn't dig into it maybe deep enough. I would love to see when volume 5 was being planned, plotted, and when it came out. Obviously 5 came out before Quarantine Comics, then it was Quarantine Comics, then it was 6. Of course, someone would have to ask W. Maxwell Prince, did Quarantine Comics affect your planning or plotting for other issues or things like that? Because
sure.
5, I think, maybe it was just a reflection of the times in some ways, but 5 seemed like a really tough pill to swallow around the time of quarantine. And I think even when we read it, I was like, whew, tonally all of the stories felt like very grim, very dark. And yes, I realize this is a horror book. I understand that is if you were to try to put this book into one, core genre, which I think is a little reductionist, but if you choose to play that game, it is horror, and that's fine. But I've always felt that this book has managed to be tonally diverse and sort of really explore different things, explore different feelings. Yes, in the end, there's sort of like an overarching feeling of unease, and sort of, anxiety and tension, but it tries to hit on other feelings as well. And I felt 5 really didn't do that.
I mean, 5 was so overwhelmingly just harrowing. It was such a dark volume. I feel like coming out of that one, I was like, is this the direction that the series is going? Is this W. Maxwell Prince trying to imply that things are getting worse and we're actually feeling it beyond just the pages of the story? Because I remember coming out of that volume going, shit, this is by far the darkest bit of the series that we've read so far. And it doesn't seem like there's any mote of hope, right? Compared to previous volumes, because I think in each volume there was at least something where you saw maybe there was an escape that could be possible, but 5 was just dark, and it was overwhelmingly just harrowing is the only word I can think of,
Yeah, and I think what was also very interesting about 5, and not that we want to discuss 5 forever, but 5 also felt like, for me, the volume in which Ice Cream Man himself was the least present. Interestingly enough, he really wasn't in it that much, if at all. And I think a lot of volume 5 was basically this core idea that, Ice Cream Man doesn't need to be up to his little machinations. He doesn't need to be plotting and whatever to make bad things happen in the world. I think 5 in a lot of ways was like, hey, the world is pretty bad, and I really don't need to do that much work, or at least I don't need to do that much work anymore. Everything is sort of set in motion. And that's kind of what 5 felt like, especially, gosh, the whole story about Alzheimer's, my goodness.
Yeah. Keith in the chat, who's hanging out with us as we record this, said that it seemed like less Ice Cream Man in the volume made it especially dark. And I kind of agree with that. Not seeing him making the plans really made that made things feel like all the work that he needed to do was done. And now we're actually seeing how humanity reacts. And like going into this volume, like, because obviously we want to talk about volume 6.
Yeah.
It seems like we're seeing more of that, but it feels almost a little bit hokier. Like things are ricketier than in the previous volume, right? Like
ricketier, good pun.
Yeah. Yes. But like it's just kind of absurd, right? Like I think a lot of this volume felt a lot more absurd in comparison to the previous ones. So I guess to get into volume 6, Nick, what were your thoughts as we're really like focusing in, I guess starting with issue 21, we've got this detective story. Like how were you feeling about it?
I really liked this volume. Really felt like a return to form of, we're going to try some different things, we're going to experiment with some different tropes and conceits and ideas, and with this kickoff issue you've obviously got this whole film noir sort of thing, this whole like gumshoe, the lady comes to the gumshoe and I can't find my husband, and
right.
I'm this hard-nosed gumshoe and I love cigarettes, and I'm gonna put my pieces of yarn up on my push pin board and say, what does it all mean, and then smoke about another pack. And so you've got that going on, and honestly this also feels like a real Call of Cthulhu story to me almost, because those all seem to revolve around this idea that you've got this this detective and he's investigating this cult, and the cult members are all like crazed and they have this weird iconography and they all don the robes and make sacrifices. And so there was a lot of that Cthulhu cult stuff going on for me, which I thought was, kind of great. This volume looks and feels a lot like some of the earlier volumes, maybe like volume 2 or 3, in terms of trying all these different things and conceits. But it also has that sort of ubiquity of Ice Cream Man, which we've seen in volumes like 4 and 5, where you have that new iconography, which is like that very minimalist ice cream cone. You actually see the guy at the beginning of 21 being crucified on this new minimalist cone iconography that we're seeing recently for Ice Cream Man. And we're also seeing a lot of the ubiquity of Ice Cream Man just all over the place, whether it's that the push pins for his cork board are ICM brand, or whether it's his cigarettes, which of course they are, their ICM brand too. So just that inexplicable ubiquity of ICM, it's here. It's still very much here,
Yeah. I took the big thing I took away from the background of this issue was like the ICM thing. I think has been around for a while, and that's maybe just artists or Marazzo just kind of saying like anything that can be branded, we'll just label it ICM, right? With rare circumstance, rare one-offs where that doesn't happen, but
which is you can look at that and be super cynical and say, well, it's low hanging fruit, and of course you're going to do it, right? But I think especially in this volume, and not to cut you off completely, but I just wanted to carry this train of thought all the way through. The idea that Ice Cream Man, not to get, like hashtag controversial, like the idea that Ice Cream Man is like fully embraced like capitalism and branding and marketing. And we see this a lot with Rick's Sweets, which is another branding, this idea that like he's sort of letting like commercialism and marketing and all of this perpetuate his whims now. It's like a mechanism for him.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point that I was going to make, is that it feels like this is no longer Rick having to push himself. He's no longer having to drive around in his ice cream truck and try to like give people ice cream. Instead,
no longer having to hustle.
Yeah, and now instead he's got these multi like national companies potentially pushing this brand, creating commercials, getting people involved. I mean, we see it not just in this issue, but in later issues in this volume of the Rick Sweets thing being a thing that is common among the people, and now it's like Rick doesn't have to do anything. Ice Cream Man doesn't have to push his stuff because the people who he's torturing, in a lot of ways, are pushing his own brand. Like they've started to just accept his presence as a normalcy instead of this strange thing that I think in previous volumes we saw people like were resisting. And the thing that makes these issues interesting, and maybe this is kind of a bigger question for the whole volume, is that maybe the stories that we're focusing on in many issues are people who are not completely sucked into the world of Ice Cream Man yet, right? They see that something strange is going on.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like this detective story is all about. It's not just him trying to figure out the mystery, which he ultimately doesn't. It's also him being one of the people that's saying, I keep fighting against this system. And, it works really, really well for the noir narrative and detective narrative. I keep pushing against this system and it keeps chewing me up and everything's going wrong in my life. And then later in the issue, when he finally accepts and says, you know what, fuck it, I'm not going to try anymore. I'm not going to try to push back. I'm just going to live my life. Everything starts to go right for him, and that's maybe... It's almost like you could pull this into a million different stories. The Matrix, as soon as you stop relating, pushing back, suddenly everything works for you inside the Matrix. Maybe this is like Rick taking over this reality that these people are living in. And anyone who pushes back ends up getting tortured a little bit. I mean, with the exception of a couple stories. I mean, because later when you think about the telethon issue that we're going to talk about, I mean, what was that guy doing but existing?
Right.
But I think that's also a different piece of commentary. But I mean, for 21, that was kind of the feeling that I got, is that he was investigating and people were trying to figure things out. And by the end, the woman who came to talk to him joins the cult. And now she's in the system. She's no longer pushing back. She's just a part of this thing because she's like, it's sucked into her brain because she's part of the company who runs the cult, I think. And he's being led astray and he gives up because it's like, I did all this stuff and I was burned in the end. So why am I even trying? So I don't know. What were your thoughts on this whole issue, I guess? Because I feel like I'm soapboxing now.
No. Well, I mean, Keith says perhaps we're approaching ICM Inc. And I mean, I think that's Rick Sweets. Rick Sweets, honestly.
Yeah.
Which is interesting that you also sort of drew a Matrix analogy, which, again, maybe we're a little bit ahead on this, but when we look at Rick Sweets, and especially when we look at the commercial in the telethon issue, Rick Sweets are definitely seen as being a form of escapism. We see people eating it to deal with their stress. We see the guy who's, sad about his grandma dying or whatever, who's eating it to deal with grief. So we see it as this form of escapism, and then of course at the end of the issue with that, we also see the marketing of self, the new medicine, self medication in a similar vein. So yeah, the idea that Rick is selling something that will either sort of distort or remove you or allow you to escape reality is interesting. When you bring up the Matrix, I think that there's maybe some comparisons there. But like beyond that, I mean, I love the noir color palette of this issue. The I Scream poster when he sneaks into the apartment is great. I also kind of want to know what this frown emoji iconography is about. I don't know if you remember, but he opens the book in the library, which again, like the detective finding the old cryptic tome in the library, like this is such like a Necronomicon sort of thingy, basically. This is like very, very Cthulhu tropey here. And it's interesting because there's 3 different chapters, right, in the book. I don't know if you remember this, and they aren't titled, but they have pictures. And the pictures are, it's a spider, and then it's an ice cream cone, and then it's a frowny face. And I kind of wondered if those were meant to be sort of the trajectory of Ice Cream Man himself. I mean, minor spoilers to volume 2?
We're in volume 6. It's fine.
I know.
Everything is.
if you had somehow read volume 6 and you're here, and you somehow didn't read volume 2 and you're still here, this is your highly specific warning, I guess, to leave. Correct me if I'm wrong. In his origins, wasn't he that freaking crazy ass spider thing that he transformed into on his home planet, and then he killed his dad or mentor or grandpa or whatever the fuck it was?
I mean, we've seen Rick in a couple different forms in the series, and Spider was definitely one of them.
Right.
That's interesting. I didn't even put that together, like that this could be a progression.
Yeah. So you have the spider, and then you have the ice cream cone. Yeah.
Oh God, and think about this, like, are these icons, and I'm looking at the page right now, figure 30, figure 31, figure 32, God help us if we get to volume 8 or 9 and these correspond with the issues, right? Because or is it the 30-second story? If you factor in the previous stories and one-offs, does this actually line up? I don't know, but yeah, I think that's very interesting to think that could be Rick's progression. And what does the sad face mean?
What does the
Yeah,
sad face mean? We
yeah.
see it in the book.
It's on the
We
cover.
see it on the cover. We see it on the note that
Hmm.
the cult guy hands to an ice cream man, not
Hmm.
the ice cream man. And then we finally see it, I think, towards the end of the issue. It's on the moon in almost
Right.
sort of a Majora's Mask-esque kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm very interested in that. I think that will be something in the future. I
Yeah.
did also find it interesting that at one point they mentioned that Rick's Sweets is opening its 21st creamery. This, of course, is issue 21.
Hmm.
Is that
Hmm.
just a weird little coincidence, or what's that? That's kind of fun.
Brother. Yeah. Again, I feel like I hope that Martin Morazzo or whoever or W. Maxwell Prince, one day they'll finish the series, they'll go back and listen to us talking about something like this and just be like, they had no fucking clue what was
Yeah.
going on. Because I feel like we're always approaching something of an idea, but then I'm like, not we only are just going off of gut feelings and like errant little things that we potentially see. How much is intentional, how much of it is just Prince just saying, hey, Martin just like, or Martine just like, put these little sigils all
Just
over
put a
wherever
smile.
you
Just
want.
put a sad face. What does it
Yeah,
mean? It's
yeah.
just a sad face. What would make me so happy is if it really didn't mean anything, but they start listening to this show and they're like, shit, like maybe we need to imbue some meaning in this. And it just starts. If we have that level of power where we're just
Yeah.
shaping the future of the book, that would be really a bad idea. W. Maxwell Prince, don't put that on our shoulders, please.
Right, right. Well,
Remember, authors on Twitter are always like, don't send me your don't send me your story
right, right,
ideas.
right.
Okay.
As much as we tag these guys on Twitter and stuff like that, I hope to God they're not listening. Um, but yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about issue
Sure.
21 or 22. Excuse
22.
me. This
Yeah.
is the Advent calendar issue. Which, going back and rereading this for
Yeah.
today's recording, I forgot how fast paced and strange this issue was, because it almost feels hopeful in comparison to the previous issue. So I don't know. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, on a very like elevator pitch sort of cursory level, obviously this is a pretty serious story about a pretty serious topic.
Mm-hmm.
We have a main character who has discovered that she is pregnant and is sort of at the young age of 18, and is attempting to decide how she's going to navigate this, life-changing moment that she now finds herself in. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's probably the best way of put that.
Yeah.
It's another one of these issues, and I love when they do this, where there's sort of a real clever framing conceit, and like once you sort of figure out the conceit, you're sort of in on the game. And of course, this one is that there's an advent calendar. And for those of our listeners who I guess aren't familiar with how an advent calendar works, I suppose there's probably a couple of you.
Sure.
So you have this, it can be made out of cardboard, it can be made out of wood or whatever, but on each day of December, leading up to Christmas, you open up the little door or container or whatever, and there's an item, typically some sort of item or gift or
It's a
little trivial thing, typically, and that's what you get for that day. And I think, of course, with this issue, you sort of have. I wasn't reading it the first time through, really paying that much close attention to what the items were, but in rereading it, gosh, like there was a lot of extra layers to the items that were being sort of selected throughout it.
Yeah, it's very cleverly like placed and structured to make this. I mean, 25 pages or 24 pages, with each page being a day of the advent calendar. And I really have to credit the team for coming up with a concise way to tell a narrative with one day being a page. Like that's just a comic book challenge. Like, can you tell a cohesive story in 25 pages, one day at a time, one page per day? Like, I feel like other teams and other creators would struggle with this, and yet here we are with guys that definitely know what the fuck they're doing. Doing something pretty solid. I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's a really, really solid issue. And yes, I mean, I think tonally compared to even compared to this volume, and then certainly compared to the previous volume. I do think it's more of a. I think it's more of a. I certainly don't want to say help I don't know, upbeat, optimistic. I think it's
Can we say anything in this series is upbeat and happy?
yeah. I mean, it's I think really what if you look at this issue as sort of being something that says that like if Ice Cream Man is sort of saying like in the last two volumes that people are inherently going to be like bad and that they're going to look out for themselves and that in that virtue, especially when we look at the telethon issue where he says like see no one gives a fuck about this guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we look at this issue sort of as saying what if Ice Cream Man is wrong, and what if we can look out for each other, and what if we can take care of ourselves, and that we sort of have a good support system, right? I mean, if you look at this issue, I think a lot of it says, do you have a good support system? Do you have people in your life, professionals in your life, people you can go to, people you trust?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you do, things will be okay, I think.
Yeah.
And I think Ice Cream Man in most of the issues is basically saying, guess what? Like, there are a lot of people that don't. And there are a lot of people who are self-obsessed or concerned and aren't looking out for others. And those people make my job as Ice Cream Man a heck of a lot easier. I don't know. Maybe I'm just totally rambling, but that was sort of my take on this issue, I guess.
No, I like that. I think that there is definitely something hopeful about this issue compared to many, many, many others that we've read.
Yeah.
And and that isn't to say that, all of Ice Cream Man is a downer, because I don't think that it is. I think it's bleak in some cases. I think it can be very like, these are the horrors of our world thanks to Ice Cream Man. It's very much like Crypt Keeper kind of style, like everything is terrible because the world can be terrible sometimes. Whereas this issue, like, it feels hopeful. It feels like there is something that I think W. Maxwell Prince is trying to say in terms of like, we talk about a lot of these subjects so lightly. I think in some cases, we talk about these ideas of like, yeah, we totally believe that, women should have a choice if they want to, get an abortion, that's their choice, and they're, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And, or even in this, part of the issue, like her dad says like, oh yeah, I just blow my brains out, like these are subjects that are not really like easy to talk about. Like, I think if something like that happens to you, maybe this is me reading a bit too much into this issue, but like,
no.
The thought of bringing a life into the world, or taking your own life out of this world, or choosing to have an abortion, like these are not easy subjects, and yet we talk about them so frivolously sometimes, maybe without even realizing it. Like, I think, like we in just common, vernacular in English, we'll say like, oh man, I'm gonna kill myself, this is so boring, like that is a strange thing to think about when like that may actually have repercussions,
Right.
And so the thing I took away from this issue was like this talk of like, going to, she goes to church and this preacher's kind of talking about things, and she goes to the doctor and they're like, oh yeah, look how exciting this whole thing is. It's like, these are life-changing choices that people can make. Yeah, I don't know, like, what does it mean to say these things so frivolously? I think is maybe what they were getting at. Maybe I'm reading too far into this, but I really thought that was like part of the point of the issue. I think, Nick, you also made a very valid point, like the idea of when you live in a world, despite how up and down it may be, to have support systems in place is very hard to come by, and those that do have them are usually appreciative. And it's like, this is just a story of someone who was going through a hard time, and yet they were able to get through it with the choices that they made because they still had their family together. Like, her parents seem a little bit too much, but at the same time, I didn't think that they were being written in such a way that you're like, yeah, you're supposed to hate these people. It's like, no, these people are just difficult, but like all family can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there was just like a really interesting, like, this was a really interesting issue kind of smack dab in this volume, or in the middle of this volume, where the next one especially, or the last issue especially, where there's like this telethon of like, sorry, no one cares,
Right.
So yeah.
I mean, there were a couple other interesting weird little curious things I noticed with this issue. I kind of went insane trying to figure out why the number 24 was missing from the advent calendar on the cover. And I obsessed over this for far too long, where I probably was getting out my own cork board and putting up my own string. And then I realized that, Nick, you're a fucking moron. The door on the cover is 24, and the door's the door just is obscured, so you can't see the number. I liked the I Heart Ice Cream Dad apron that the duck was wearing, and then her dad was wearing.
I mean, I thought there was like a interesting thing with the priest where she goes to talk to the priest, and he's cutting this plant, and the plant is like this weird bubbly plant thing, and this might be me just like just kind of pointing at Morazzo's art and being like, yeah, he definitely intended to do this. But it's like this weird bubbly thing that we've seen in a previous issue before that was like on an alien planet. And I think that was the same issue where she gets the plant seeds, the flower seeds, I should say, and they're called Morning Glories. I don't know. Again, might be me just reading too far into it, but it was kind of weird, like that these weird plants showed up because they don't look like regular plants, and they have that little like weird diamond symbol that we saw in the previous issue that the detective pulled the book at the library had that same symbol on it. So I don't know. Again, little. Are they doing this on purpose, or am I just going fucking crazy here now?
I mean, as the series goes on, the idea that you're like trying to like pull callbacks like even further back just becomes more and more possible just because of how much content there is. The Coffee Bucks logo was terrifying, but spot on. The Starbucks homage.
Yeah, what a subtle little thing that like if you don't look, you'd never see it.
And it almost looks like it's exactly that silhouette that's over the detective's bed at the end of issue 21, which is kind of creepy. The only other thing I do want to say about this issue, because I do think this is definitely something, is that the OB that she goes to visit, the doctor, who they say used to be a cowboy, he's got these brownish, orangish eyes. And I'm pretty sure that that's obviously, I think it's supposed to be Caleb, especially the cowboy reference. I think this is supposed to be some form of Caleb. And we'll see another person with these very, very distinctive orangish, brownish eyes in issue 24.
Oh.
And I think it's a Caleb thing. And I would almost want to go back to the last volume when we have that Lex Luthor-ish character in the Superman story, which was clearly Caleb. And I wonder if he has this exact same very distinctive eye color, because I think that there's something there. Yeah.
Yeah, the weird thing I took away from that scene is that he says, "Do you see with your eye?" Like, what a weird thing to say to someone,
buddy. Like this is you're not like a new age guru. Maybe you should check what your job is, because I think you're gonna make people uncomfortable.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting issue. I mean, again, I feel like it's definitely them trying to experiment with something that works really well. And yeah, I don't think there was anything major, like as far as little iconography things or whatever that I pulled out of that beyond those things.
I mean, beyond that, you've just got the normal, ubiquity of Ice Cream Man, like the Home Depot is called Rick's Goods or whatever. And I'm sure maybe some people will look at this issue and at the end say, well, like, this doesn't seem like an Ice Cream Man issue. And for me, I would say, yeah, it kind of doesn't. And that's great. Like, honestly, first off, that's fine. I'm okay with that. And secondly, I think this book has shown up to this point that it is okay with taking the freedom to really sort of take little side steps or really just sort of tell stories in this anthology. It is an anthology series, let's not forget. And maybe an issue doesn't have to have that ICM through line running through it. And that's fine. I mean, that's freedom. I'm okay with it.
Yeah. The only thing that I think we didn't touch on is like, there's something with ducks in this, and maybe there's something where I'm just not missing. I'm missing that I just don't know about it. But otherwise, I totally agree with you. Like, nothing says that Ice Cream Man has to show up or that they need to eat ice cream and it needs to say Rick. All the pieces are there. They're in the background, right? Like everything is labeled ICM. There's all these little things and pieces, and if you've been reading along, you've probably picked up on some, if not most, because I don't think that they're doing anything to necessarily hide it. It's just that you need to take in the full comic. And like, I kind of expected things like on the Christmas tree for there to be something weird. We didn't see anything like that. So it's like, is this house sort of protected? Is there something? I mean, like at the end, the dad's got like an Ice Cream Man sweater on, but like at the end of the day, like every day is a gift, or every day a gift. Like there's like this pleasant ending that's like maybe there is like hope for the future if you are in a situation that allows for it, you know. And I think things could have gone poorly for her in any other circumstance, but something happened that made this one work. And maybe we're seeing kind of like the fruits of Ice Cream Man's labor is growing, but every once in a while there's a story that doesn't have to be as corrupted by him as most others are.
Well, and I think so many holiday narratives, whether they're dramatic or comedic, are always sort of based around the idea that, like, oh, the holidays are such a hard time for people because, well, why are they a hard time for people? Oh, I don't know what gift to get so and so, and I don't want to see this relative this year, and oh man, I don't want to have to deal with all of the shoppers at the store, and like those are the things that we normally hear about like a holiday narrative, right? Like these are the things that are stressing people out. And so I think this story likes to flip that script on like, oh well, of course it's going to be like a terrible story because I'm sure the family isn't getting along or whatever. And in this issue, it's like, yeah, things are definitely stressful, but it's not for the so-called real stressful reasons that most people think the holidays are about. This is something way more serious.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, we should move on. Let's move into the next issue.
Yeah.
This is the talk show issue 23. It's mostly prose. Nick, thoughts?
Yeah. I think this will be probably the most polarizing issue of this volume. And if you do believe that this volume is kind of a return to form in the sense that this book likes to just play with different structures and ideas, yeah, this one does play with the new structure. It's called 2/3 to 75% of it is prose. Do I think it works? I think it kind of does. Obviously, the core conceit here is that it's almost like, I'd say, like old fashioned talk show. We still see some of this these days. They every talk show, we saw this on Johnny Carson, even has the animal guy. I think with Carson it was like Jack Hanna, if you remember him, and he would come on and he would bring the tiger in, and Johnny Carson would say, oh no, I hope we're insured, blah blah blah. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Secretly, hoping he doesn't get mauled to death,
right?
And we just have this just animal segment, right? Ha ha, it's dangerous, it's not dangerous, the animal runs across the room or jumps into the audience, or no one knows where the snake went or whatever. And I felt that this issue wants to play with the idea of public perception versus what's sort of lying underneath the surface, or, in the terms of this talk show, what's happening behind the scenes, right? And so we have this TV host, and his name is it Mitch?
Mac Benson is his name.
Yeah. And he's this slick guy. And what we end up with are these sort of chapters of prose that sort of discuss his lead up to this moment with this animal guy, and then what happens following. And I don't want to, immediately give too much away. I mean, what were your initial takes? Because we definitely have not had an issue really this prose laden at all ever.
Yeah, I was I don't know. I thought this was an interesting issue. The prose really didn't put me off too much. I mean, W. Maxwell Prince is a very talented writer, and I think that his prose is draws you in enough that, like,
yeah, it's rapid fire. It's engaging. It's
exactly
fast.
Exactly. Yeah. And I didn't feel like the pacing was off. I felt like scattering in with images of the action as it happened was really smart, to try to break that. I think you run into sometimes with prose pages. You see this in the Marvel books a lot, where there's like an info dump page, and it doesn't hit well because the font's so small, or it's formatted poorly. And this super worked for me. So like, I thought what was really interesting about this issue overall is the constant talk about the incident and then the deliberate suspense put into the story by having the animated drawn bit be the incident happening slowly, page
Yes,
after
absolutely.
page after page. Like this is not necessarily an Ice Cream Man story. Again, this is them really playing with the format inside the Ice Cream Man universe and saying like, how can we do this really terrible thing in the slowest way possible? Because the action itself is very fast. Therefore, what can we do to draw it out? And I think it's perfectly delivered, and getting all the backstory kind of feeding into it. It's like watching a 2 hour long movie where the major point of the story is happening in like a minute clip or in like 30-second clips throughout a 2 hour feature, and you're getting interviews and background to understand these people as things lead up to the climax. I think it's really smart, really, really smart.
Yeah, and I think I think it sort of cleverly frames this idea of how can we end up maybe not feeling so bad about this guy and like being mentally prepared to handle this like horrible act of violence, right? But by the time we get there, we're like, okay, like maybe some of this makes sense. You know, we learn that this host maybe isn't the most perfect person. He's clearly got issues at home. He maybe like doesn't totally appreciate or respect this producer of his, but also maybe this producer is obsessed on a level with him that's a little bit unhealthy too.
Yeah.
We learn that, you know, he's got issues with like the interns and his assistant producers. You know, the list goes on, but these are just things that we're reading about. You know, this isn't what's being presented, right? And I think that's what's sort of interesting. Like if you look at the conventional comic book pages as what he's sort of like putting out there as his curated image, right? And then you look at the prose as like, let me tell you what's really going on here. I think you have this sort of like, oh, well, here's the host and he's behind his desk and he's perfectly lit and he's, he's got his own wardrobe person and he's, wearing makeup and he's had his hair done and he's, seems to be in his element or whatever. And then the prose is, well, let me tell you how things really are. Like, let me show you what's really going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting. And then obviously, I don't know if you caught this, his logo for his show is clearly the Jimmy Fallon logo. I don't know if you've seen that, but
it's the Tonight Show. Yeah, it's the Tonight Show logo. I mean, this is a very thinly, parodied version of the Tonight Show. Yeah, I mean, like the things that really struck me about this is that I still felt like it's all still tied into the universe, right? Like this feels very much like I said, an experiment, but like if you're, again, you've been reading Ice Cream Man for a couple of volumes and now,
know that Rick Saccharin is Ice Cream Man,
right?
Yeah.
Rick's there. We get the kid, when they're handing off the vulture, right? There's the little kid who had the balloon, right, from the previous things, and that little kid shows up later in the prose, right? Same with the dog in the straitjacket. Like all of these things tied together. Like there's these common elements that I don't understand why they keep reoccurring, but they do keep reoccurring to kind of almost remind you this is still in the Ice Cream Man universe. Like, don't think for a second that we've escaped. And again, this brings back this idea of altered reality. These similar things happening to numerous people in different aspects of the world. They all go to hospitals and they all see this dog in a straitjacket and this kid with a balloon. What does it mean? And that's, maybe we'll never get that answer. Maybe it's just there to remind you, like in a weird Twin Peaks style. Like, did we ever get answers about, I don't know, anything? I didn't fucking watch Twin Peaks, but like there's the weird black and white room, right? That like, what was the point of that? What is the series? And maybe Nick, but still, like there's like these things that kind of just keep dinging you and saying like, this is not the perception of reality that these people are seeing, or maybe the perception of reality that we're seeing through them is not true, or it's altered in some way. And these are the commonalities between them.
Right.
So like, I don't know, that again, it's an interesting issue, but like, that's the thing that I was reminded of upon a reread, was like, there's still Ice Cream Man elements to this, no matter how far astray this feels.
Yeah. It was an interesting exercise, to be sure. Yeah. And I do think honestly that he does seem to be a pretty capable prose writer, and it does seem to clip along at a rate that I think even people who are a little bit leery of prose and comics, especially this much, will, if you give it a chance, I think it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, let's move into the last issue. And then we can give some overall thoughts as when we wrap up.
Yeah.
But the last issue in this volume is issue 24. It's the telethon issue. I think that the cover has like a wonderfully terrifying ice cream man in black and white that like is really striking. If only because it feels old school, but at the same time, like very deliberately designed to be like a poster for something.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It feels like an old-timey flyer for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I guess like this issue to me, it put me right back on the depression train.
Yeah.
If only because
I mean,
like
okay,
what a
that's
wild
interesting.
issue.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I don't. What were your overall thoughts? I guess.
For me, again, like I think if there's anything that we've learned from this volume, and I think anything that we've learned from previous volumes, it's like don't try to pigeonhole this book because
Oh
it's
yeah,
going to go places and do things that you don't think it will. That said, like if we personally, like if I think about a lot of the issues as sort of an anthology dark dark humor horror element, like this issue feels almost like a return to form from what we've seen in a lot of issues where there is something sort of humorous about it, but it's also, you know, very very serious. And of course in this issue it's basically a it's the PBS pledge drive from your youth that you remember, except it's for Jerry's life.
right, right.
The the Save Jerry's Life Fund, right?
Mm-hmm,
And yeah, it's interesting because we follow around this guy named Jerry. He thinks something is wrong with him. He thinks that he's ill, that he isn't feeling well. But everywhere he goes, they seem to tell him that, you know, you're fine, or, you know, the doctor says your blood work is okay. But there are people in his world that come up to him and say, oh, well, we're rooting for you, or we hope things turn out okay. Because, of course, they seem to be knowledgeable about this fundraiser,
Yeah,
and Jerry is just oblivious.
it's such an absurd thing. Like that. This issue really shook me because I was like, does Jerry not realize what's going on? Is he not supposed to? But people keep talking to him, right?
Right.
And I, all the while, like, are we watching a dramatization of Jerry's life? Like, there's like a really weird, like Moebius strip style of storytelling here that's happening, where Ice Cream Man is clearly, you know, this announcer on this TV show talking about Jerry. He knows everything there is to know about Jerry, and it's so perfectly relevant to the bit in the story that's happening in Jerry's life. It's really kind of a question. And plus we get these inserted ads, these fake ads for Rick's Sweets Raspberry Surprise. And it's like, are we watching a TV show? Are we witnessing Jerry's real life? Is this a cutback? Is it what is the flow that's supposed to be happening here? And I don't expect there to be an answer. And I'm not saying that this is a negative thing, but I did find it really unique the way they approach this issue, if only like to kind of make you question what's real and what's not. Is this telethon thing actually happening to Jerry? Is this like an altered out or like state of reality where Jerry is being affected by some outside force and has no idea, but some people are in on it and some people aren't? Because clearly Jerry is getting worse and not doing good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Ice Cream Man is commenting on it and is he making it worse? Is his discussion of it actually the problem, or is Jerry actually having a problem and Ice Cream Man is just commenting on it and reveling in the horror?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think to sort of get at that question, and I don't know if this resolves it, but it certainly does feel like Ice Cream Man, how do I put this? Like is sort of setting Jerry up for failure. Like,
Yeah.
if you read between the lines, it's like the game is rigged, right? The deck is stacked. We see this, and I think you can read both ways into this, which I think is interesting. The number that you're supposed to call to help Jerry is 555-1234. Now, if you're someone who maybe knows a little bit about pop culture, you know that 555 numbers are typically used in movies, comic books, television shows, novels, whatever.
Yeah.
Because 555s aren't real, and that's because they didn't want people calling 867-5309 anymore because it was a song. All joking aside, that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
And so 555 numbers exist. And what's kind of interesting is if you look at the 555 number, you can go, well, that's W. Maxwell Prince basically needing to make sure he doesn't have people calling a real phone number, even though we all know that viral marketing does make fake phone numbers. But what's interesting is if you think about this in a different way, you can say, Ice Cream Man is using a fake number that doesn't exist.
Right.
So Jerry doesn't have a fucking chance because
Right.
the number isn't real.
Well, on top of that, 2 pages later after that, like, again, I'm skimming through this as we're talking, like, the announcer Ice Cream Man character is like, you're reading a comic book right now. And he's like, I will kill this dog if you turn the page. And then, of course, you turn the fucking page because you're reading a comic, right? Like,
well, I mean, Michael, I do want to point out that Ice Cream Man does mention that it's a comic book, and he holds it up, and he mentions that it's made of paper. And I read it digitally, so I'm absolved in this absolved in this dog's death. I have no.
Well, to all you print buyers out there, shame on you.
the digital versus print debate just took a whole new twist.
So Nick, really quick though, did you read the single issue or did you read the collected edition?
I read the single. I read the single issue.
So in the collected edition, maybe this is different in the single because they do this sometimes with lettering. It says, drop the quote graphic novel in your hands right now and I'll donate my own money. I wonder if it's a single issue in the version that you have, which is just like, this is, again, people listening at home, if you've gotten this far, thank you. Also, like, this is us just going, this is a fun little detail. Like, I don't think this has anything to do with the story.
God,
I just think
that's great.
What a fun little bit to throw into your comic. Like, this
what
is
a wild one too, because how many people are going to figure this out?
Right. Well,
because you either have to talk to someone else or you have to own both.
Right.
Or you have no clue.
Right. It's just a fun little like thing to like subvert your expectation while you're reading this book. Like, is he actually talking to me? And this adds another layer of like realism of like, someone might be talking to me. It's such a fun, I don't know, I fucking love how smart that feels. It's not like it's a really like kind of dumb fun thing, but it feels really clever when you kind of start to analyze it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about this issue, and then also specifically if you look at in the Advent Calendar issue where we have the what is it? Is it a termite? It's a
cockroach.
It's a cockroach, right?
Yeah.
So we have this cockroach that, was it alive? Was it not? Was it dead? Was it moving? And of course, the therapist, I think, says, based on what you're going through, this could be like mild psychosis, and puts her on Xanax. I think when I look at that moment, and then when I also look at some of the stuff in Jerry's life, maybe one of the ways you could read everything that Jerry's going through is that maybe it's all somewhat in his head. Maybe especially the idea that he's talking to these people and they seem to be aware of it, but he doesn't. Like, is he really encountering these people in the same way that, was the cockroach really alive or not? I don't know. But I mean, you're definitely not wrong in the sense that it is very confusing in this issue. What has happened? What did happen? What is happening? Right? Like, is this past tense? Does Jerry really have a chance? And of course, I think at the end of the issue, we know the answer to that. I think that does sort of become clear.
Yeah. I mean, and of course, the reason, I said originally that this was really depressing is like, no one cares, like, or at least they don't care enough to actually do something about it in the moment.
Right.
Which is really just depressing in such a strange way that like, the guy says to him, I got, money's a little tight right now, but as soon as I get some, I'm going to call that number, and it's like everybody seems to be saying that to him. Even after he dies, the doctor's like, oh, it's my anniversary, I got to get out of here. Like, there's no reverence. There's no nothing for this person that has just died. Like, it's so frustrating. And then, of course, at the end, the last thing one of the callers says, like, oh, we forgot to plug the phones in. Of course, no one could call. Like, things were doomed to fail. And of course, just like the number thing that you said, Nick, it's all like just Ice Cream Man fucking around just to say, like, I intentionally set this up to fail. And I got your hopes up intentionally to make sure that nothing could actually, you would basically feel bad about this in the end. This is like almost them breaking the fourth wall beyond just pointing out that this is a comic book. Like, this setup for failure is almost comedic in the way that, like, no one cared and there was no point and there was nothing. And it all falls back to Rick's nihilism of like, nothing matters. Everything's doomed. So like at the end, I just, it's consistency. Good on these guys.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really, if you, I think it's easy to say, oh, this is like the idea that maybe people aren't looking out for each other, and it's just about Jerry encountering a ton of people in his life that are, some of them, well, that's what's weird, right? Some of them are very aware of what's going on, and they're like, oh, we hope things are okay. And then like other people like have no idea about what's going on. It is interesting. The doctor he goes to, again, this is what I was talking about. If you look at the doctor he goes to, who says his blood work is fine, his doctor also has these very distinctive orange-brown eyes. And the doctor even says to him, have you considered the idea that maybe you're an unwitting participant in a televised fundraising event? And of course he's smiling because it sounds funny. But again, if you view Caleb as this character who like, even what he says to the girl, like, do you see with your eyes, right? If you see Caleb as this character who sees beyond the illusion, right? This character who sees beyond the illusion that Ice Cream Man is creating and sort of wants to bring the truth to light. I think in both cases you have these sort of truth teller characters that are attempting to do this.
Yeah.
It's also super interesting. This is the one moment that like dawned on me that's super fucked up, right? So first off, he says, oh, we forgot to plug in the phones, which is clearly not true because people are calling. But at one point, I think Rick says, or one of the people that's taking the phone call says, oh, someone just called in and they're not going to pledge anything, or they're going to pledge 0 or whatever. This is super fucked up. Okay. Because like, this is not a telemarketer who calls you, right? And you say, I'm not interested, right? This is someone calling in, right? Unprompted, calling in to announce that they are going to give nothing. How fucked up is that?
Yeah. I mean, and it just comes back to this, like, there was no point. Like, it's this negative swirling pool of nihilism of like, there is no point to anything. Why even hope, Yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting. And then of course the final pages are this whole like, take this self-medication thing to improve yourself, which what is that? Is that a positive message? Is that like pills will solve everything? I don't know if that's positive or negative, but it's definitely a strange way to end the issue, with this very depressing in loving memory thing with Jerry.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a very nothing burger of a obituary announcement at that,
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, what a volume. I guess like we've been talking about it for a lot. So I guess what are your final thoughts on this thing, Nick?
I mean, there was one other very weird thing about issue 24, and I think I'm onto something here. I just didn't have the time to do the digging on this, and I knew something was going on, and I have to figure this out later. So, if you look at all of the women who are answering the phones during the pledge drive, I don't know if you noticed, but they're wearing this weird sort of checkerboard getup. And all of them are wearing that. And it's the exact same getup from the main character from ICM number 15. And if you go look up the main cover, if you go Google Ice Cream Man number 15,
right,
and she's on the cover wearing the exact same suit. I don't know. It feels too much like a coincidence to just be like, there's something going on there, and I didn't remember enough of issue 15. I know it was called the coat check story, and she ends up wearing someone else's coat. I couldn't remember the rest of the story, but I feel like there's got to be something there because it's so weird that they're all dressed like her, and I don't know. And I don't know what that means. But if you've looked at the image, you can see what I mean. So.
I mean, it just sounds to me like once this series eventually concludes, we're gonna do a whole retrospective, and we're gonna get the fucking corkboard out, Nick.
Yeah,
That's what's gonna happen.
we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out, I'm sure. And then of course the dentist in 24 is the dentist from the Quarantine Comics issue.
Yeah, he's got the superhero poster in the background,
bubblegum guy or whatever. Yeah.
Pinky ring.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh man. Like in terms of overarching points, you were asking. There's a really weird through line in this book, and I don't know what this means. And I hope like this isn't maybe W. Maxwell Prince is dealing with something, but there's like a through line of divorce in this book. I
Yeah,
don't know if you noticed this.
I did.
The detective's wife is divorcing him. Jerry's wife is bringing about divorce papers. What were the other two issues?
Max getting divorced.
He's getting divorced. Yep.
Yep.
The TV host is getting divorced. And then of course there isn't really any divorce brought up in the Advent calendar issue, but that sort of in some ways is a little bit of an outlier. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the rest all mention or have an envelope or discuss. Is it Sweet and Company? Sweet and Associates, I think, law firm.
Mm-hmm.
In their divorce attorneys, and so I don't know what that means, but it's in every issue, like this theme of, and it's not like at the front and center. It's just this background thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet and Associates divorce attorneys, yeah.
But I think previous volumes have had similar themes though, and I don't know if that's like an intentional like subtext to each volume, but I think if we went back and looked at the previous 5 volumes, we'd probably see something similar to, not about divorce, but about a thing.
Yeah.
And I think we've noted on that before, but I do feel what you're saying, because it's there. Like marital strife seems to be at the center of this volume, It's interesting.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not just surface level. It is definitely part of the detective story, and definitely not as much about Jerry. We don't really touch on it that much with Jerry, but we do have that argument that he has with his wife. And certainly the TV talk show host, we get to read a whole bunch about how they're not getting. Okay, so I mean, maybe it's actually a bigger part than I thought.
It is a through line. I guess when I say it's at the center, I mean like each volume touches, or each issue touches on it to the point where like you can't ignore it.
Right. Yeah.
So there's something there, but again, is it coincidence in that it just they needed to bring up this Sweets and Co. divorce, or this attorney company, or something else? Because like the Rick Sweets thing is also a reoccurring thing. Like it happens in a couple of issues. So like again, this is more just permeating, I think, of the Ice Cream Man, right? He is everywhere. He's touching every element of things. It's not just one thing, it's all things.
Yeah, and I mean, what is divorce if not just another form of discord between people? So definitely that's something he would be interested in. So
exactly. Well, I mean, what a fucking volume. I mean, my overall thoughts are just, I'm glad that this one wasn't so depressing, I guess. But even with the last issue, I think like there is a question in my mind of where is the turning point? Is this series going to have a turning point? I think you and I, maybe I've been leaning on this quite a bit, is that there is a larger narrative here. There may not be, and maybe we're looking into things, but I do think that it's odd to look at this series and not say there's something bigger going on. Especially when you compare earlier issues to later ones, or even issues from middle volumes and stuff that we've seen so far. Like there is a permeation, a growth, an expansion, a change of Ice Cream Man's persona in terms of how he presents in the world. Like we get issues like the Jerry issue where it's a telethon and it's clearly Rick doing his thing, but then we get like the Advent calendar, no Ice Cream Man at all. And I think, like Keith said earlier, no Ice Cream Man in volume 5 at all. It was like a departure from the series, but at the same time, it's just an evolution of the character. He doesn't have to be the singular person.
He wasn't there at all, and yet it was definitely the darkest volume.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm very curious as to either if there is an end game or what it's going to be, because there is still unresolved conflict between Rick and Caleb that I think we need to see come to fruition. I'm very much looking forward to when those moments come. So I'm hyped, still excited for more of this volume. Can't wait to dig into volume 7 when it comes out, which is very soon. I think it's coming out in January. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, fucking Ice Cream Man, like what a mind fuck every month, every time we read this.
Yeah. I'm definitely there with you. I think that I'm still kind of sitting waiting on that moment where we left in maybe volume 2, end of volume 3, where Caleb is in the back of the ambulance and God, are the drivers dead or they're like super high? I think.
Yeah, they're high on all sorts of drugs.
Which is interesting because do you remember this in this volume in the prose section when the wife goes to visit her husband? When she arrives at the hospital, it's the two paramedics talking to each other, and they're both talking about getting high on drugs. And I was like, oh my God.
Could this be a subtle progression of that plot? Maybe it's there in this volume.
Well, it's like a lead up, right? It's like a lead up to what we know. So,
well, yeah. Again, Nick, this is where we need to start getting the board out with the yarn, because when did things? We could talk about that all day.
Like a moment like this begins to go like, okay, maybe these volumes aren't all happening in a linear progression,
right?
Which
I don't know.
Mind blown.
Yeah. We will see in time, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just leave it on this. I think as much as I've gotten impatient about like wanting to see that move forward, I think if you look at the idea that Ice Cream Man, as you yourself said, in some ways we've seen him evolve into not being not showing up as the Ice Cream Man. In some ways we've seen him moving on to take on other personas, and beyond that we've seen him just not even there. I think I still feel like we're seeing Caleb also changing and sort of evolving into these other personas. So
well, there's like a yin and yang to this pair, right? In that one has to we hope. But I think that like as we see Ice Cream Man beyond become other things, I mean, like I didn't even catch this, but it makes sense, right? If Ice Cream Man is beyond just the persona of the Ice Cream Man, and Caleb then has to match to adapt, like he's going to show up in subtle ways as well. Not constantly in the foreground, not constantly as Caleb, but as something else, So hopefully we'll see more of that. I know you read a little bit ahead, but we're not talking about that today.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about issue 25. Yeah.
So this is another fun fucking crazy volume. I appreciate all the challenges that I think the team put themselves up to in this volume. I think Morazzo has only gotten better. I think O'Halloran has only gotten better. Like the noir issue alone shows that like the color work in this book is fucking bizarre and can do a lot more than I think the palette that we're used to. So I just want to make sure we touched on that, because man, it's you pointed it out earlier and I definitely agree. Like the range on these guys is incredible, and I can't wait for the next volume.
Yeah, 100%. Completely agree.
Well, I guess to wrap things up, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Nick at Death Star Plans. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. You can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at IRCB Podcast. And hopefully, you give us a follow and like and all that kind of stuff. We appreciate it.
This episode first aired on Patreon and is possible because of our wonderful patrons. You can join today for access to exclusive series like IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more. You can join now at patreon.com/IRCB podcast. And if you haven't already, please rate and review our show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to our podcasts. It really helps us spread the word about IRCB.
You can join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more, and listen to our episodes live as we record, such as our good friend Keith today did. There's a link to that in the show notes. And it would help us a lot if you tell your friends or your local comic shop next time you're there about the show. I mean, I know we damned print readers earlier, but I didn't mean it. Go shop at your local shop. Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all of our music. We can't thank them enough. Xander's a super cool guy who makes us sound extra cool every single week by editing the show. I want to say thanks to Nick for recording this episode and this whole series with me. Thanks to Keith for hanging out with us live. Thanks to all of our patrons for supporting us. And thank you to you, the listener, for keeping this show going week after week. Until next time, comics are good, and so are you.